Going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. Our speakers are predominantly our MFRPA board members, so I'll give you a little bit of an opportunity to get to know them. I'll introduce Frank Green. Frank is with the Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection. He is our NFDOA region representative to the board, which is in the northeast corner of our country. I have Robin Brown. She's with the Maryland Department of Health. Robin is our member at large to the board, so she represents all the states in that at large position. I have Brian Warren with the Louisiana Department of Health, and Brian represents the AFDOS region, which is in our southeast corner of the country. I have Rick Beckstrand, who's with the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. Rick represents WAFTO, our western region. I've got Philip Fruching, who's our Arkansas Department of Public Health and MC AFTO representative, so he gets kind of that South Central. I also have Sherry Morris, who is with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, and she represents the CASA region, kind of that mid-central East Coast. We also have Tressa Madden-McGill, who is with the FDA's Office of Partnerships, Division of Standards Implementation. Some of you may know Tressa as she's working with your particular states, but she and her colleagues work with all of our state programs to help them get ready for audits and to get their program in shape and come into conformance with the standards. So she'll be able to share some insight and some wisdom there as well. So we are going to ask everybody to just keep their lines muted during the presentations. We are going to take Q&A at the end. So if you have a question, recommend you just go ahead and jot it down, or you can go ahead and drop it in chat and we'll scroll back through chat and grab those questions. But the speakers are probably not going to stop in the middle of their section to answer questions. We'll get those at the end. So just make a note of those and we will make sure that we get back to those, and we'll definitely, like I said, have that Q&A session at the end. So with that, when all the introductions being done, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Frank to kick us off with our initial overview of the standards. Frank.
Little technical glitch. I have to unmute myself. Thank you very much, Pat. I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon. I know everybody's busy, and I got to welcome all the new people because it's a journey, and you should realize that it is a journey. And sometimes it seems like you're never off of that journey because, you know, there are multiple parts here that you're going to have to fix as you go along on that journey. But the manufactured food regulatory program is a critical component of the, excuse me, what happened here? Is a critical component of the integrated food safety system. You know, uniformity has always been a big thing, I think in AFTO, NFDOA, and on the state level, particularly for my state. You know, we're such a small state. Plugged into the Northeast there. So uniformity is a critical issue with us so that we're uniform with our neighbors and they're uniform with us. When fully implemented, the program standards define a set of the best practice of regulatory system. And you want to go on to the next one, 3. Okay. Okay, conformance with the MFRPS program standards requires a regulatory agency to continuously assess, evaluate, and take necessary corrective action, which sounds very similar to the public health sort of imperatives to sort of know what you're doing, to develop programs to address those issues, and then to implement the programs. MFRPS conformance will facilitate a system of mutual reliance between the FDA and the state regulatory agencies to support continued improvement in regulatory manufactured food programs throughout the nation. Kind of rushing a little bit, you know, it's the first time here, so you'll have to forgive me a little bit if I'm going too quickly. Number 4, please. The program standards are comprised of 10 standards that establish requirements for the critical elements of a regulatory program designed to protect the public from foodborne illness and injury, and I think that's what we're all striving to seek. And the first is regulatory foundation, whether or not your regulatory format is equal or equivalent to the FDA and uniform with other regulatory standards. And there's an evaluation form that everybody does when they come on board with this. And pretty much everybody has done that at this point in time. Staff training, which takes an incredible amount of time and effort to make sure your staff is trained and you maintain the staff. I think one of the problems that we're facing a little bit right now in terms of staff training is keeping trained staff. But I think that was one of the best things about MFRPS, for me anyways, for my program, was the staff training. I think it really professionalized us, and I think it brought a new sense of a purpose to my inspectors as well. The inspection program itself, and the inspection auditing, which can be another tricky program, and based on our experiences, food-related illness outbreak and hazard response. In my state, we are not the lead agency for food illness, related illness, public health is, but this initiatives in MFRPS and in RRT has enabled us to integrate more fully with our public health partners and our agricultural partners. So I think we do a better job overall of preventing and dealing with outbreaks and illnesses as they occur. Compliance and enforcement. This is another tricky aspect because you're dealing with the attorneys of it. And one of the things that I kind of heard from some of the attorneys is the public health aspect of it too. Should you really be going to the courts on it? But this is a really kind of critical area, and I think it needs. I think it's one of the things that it's really helped us as we go through the standards through time. Industry and community relations, which is, I think, one of the easier ones, because I think most of us, and I know my program, we're sort of used to outreach to the industry. We're sort of, used to talking to our counterparts in the industry, and education is really one of the most persuasive things that we can do. Program resources, and this is another critical issue, and I got to thank FDA for all the funds that they contribute to training, because that's really one of the big things that we invest in. But program resources and maintaining the staffing levels is also a critical part of MFRPS and going forward with your program. Program assessment, how are we doing in our programs? It's another one, and the laboratory support. And laboratory support. So that's basically, I think, my slides. I hope I haven't gone too fast, but and I try to give a little thumbnail sketch of some of the issues that we've faced along the way. I hope I haven't taken too much time either. But those are sort of things that we're facing, and like I said, it's a journey. And I think that if you look at it as a journey and just enjoy the journey, I think you'll be a lot happier, because there's always work to do. Programs they kind of unravel a little bit sometimes along the side, so you have to fix things as they go along. So that's to be expected as well. The next person to present is going to be Robin Henderson, and she's going to do it on Standard 1 Regulatory Foundation. Robin, do you want to, or Daphne, could you set up Robin for that?
Yep, thanks, Frank. Okay, for Standard 1, really that's your opportunity to compare your state statutory jurisdiction for doing inspections against the FDA's, and to find out where you have equivalency and where you are not equivalent, or who would do which kind of inspections, I guess I would say, in your area. And it goes section by section. So it really is a time for you to have a program to evaluate the legal authority in your state, laws and regulations, and then compare it to the FDA. So for our state, we have adopted as amended in our regulations for both federal law, CFR 21, and for the regulations as well. So we would think that we're lucky in that way, so that we would be fully equivalent in everything. And I know that probably for every state, here represented, there's a different shade of gray in this area. So for us, we're fully equivalent for most things. However, for example, the state does not have jurisdiction over producers of honey or of wine that's less than 6% alcohol or of infant formula. So although we do adopt by reference, we have to make a note in our appendix 1.2 that those are things that are handled solely by the federal district here in our state. So in terms of documentation, you want to do the appendix 1.1. And that will be describing your written program or saying where you describe your written program. And then 1.2 is a sort of a line by line, if you will, comparison of your state laws and regulations and the federal laws and regulations. In terms of legal representation, we haven't had to have legal review in recent years because we are adopting by reference. But if your state does not adopt the federal code, the laws and regulations by reference, you may need your state's attorney general to conduct a legal review to determine whether you're equivalent or partially equivalent or not equivalent. So I think that's most of what I would like to say about standard 1. For standard 2, the training program, this program I think is this one standard is the standard that I think requires the most paperwork. It takes a lot of work to make sure that your staff is trained. You need to have a written training plan. Then you need to document how your staff is trained, both in coursework, field work, and continuing education. And that can get lengthy over time with your staff. The training includes both basic training and advanced training coursework for things like juice and seafood or low acid canned foods. So a new staff comes on and you need to get them through basic coursework, get them through field trainings. They need to be evaluated. In general, your field evaluations for basic training would include 10 practice trainings and then 2 test trainings. Some states, in our state, we have a small staff, so we don't really do staff that will do just say warehouses, low and moderate facilities. We have them do all, but if you do have enough staff to have your new people just start out with low and moderate facilities, risk facilities, then you only would have to do 5 practice trainings with your test training to get them out into the field maybe a little bit faster. So this requires your self-assessment 2.1. It requires you to keep a state training record summary for each person. And then each person needs an individual training record. So our coordinator has set up a database to keep all of the records for each individual. And you need to be sure that training is done in the right sequence. And I think that has sometimes hung us up a little bit. We haven't maybe had a course, but we thought they were ready to do inspections in a certain area. So those are, I think, the things that you have to be careful when you go to look at all of that. When you set up your coursework descriptions and what you want to use for your coursework, you have to really consider all the FDA coursework that's available. Plus you can do your own kind of coursework. There's a whole lot of ways to get your training done. And I think for us, when we started out, it was just, we were going to accept everything that FDA had and go forward that way. But sometimes it doesn't work well that way. Sometimes you need to go faster than you can get the coursework, for example. And so we've gone further into the process of developing some of our own tools to be sure that our inspectors get what they need able to do inspections as soon as they're ready and as soon as we would need them. So I think that's basically a synopsis of how I feel about standard 1 and 2. Brian's going to talk next about standards 3 and 4.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we're going to start here with standard 3, which is the program inspection. Your inspection program. And so the elements for that include your inventory of facilities that are under your regulatory authority, a documentation of your inspection procedures, the reporting procedures for your inspection activities, your methods for addressing recall products, your methods for addressing consumer complaints as well as industry complaints. And if you are conducting sampling of food products, then also your procedures and equipment and transport and chain of custody requirements for your samples. So the records that are related to all of these are required to be maintained for at least 3 years, or whatever the program, whatever the department requirement may be, whichever happens to be longer. So I'll talk a little bit about these things and touch on them in a little more detail. So in terms of consumer complaints and industry complaints, so the industry complaint was something that was a little bit new when we first started dealing with the standards, that we hadn't really addressed previously. And that is, of course, when industry has a specific concern about either an inspection that took place at a facility or with an inspector who was at that facility. And so you would need to develop a protocol to address those concerns. And then sampling, is a thing that not everybody does based on resources that are available. Our sampling program is contingent on flexible funding funds at this point to sustain it. But if that is something that your state is doing on a regular basis already, you may already have protocols in place for that. The different documents that are going to be required under Standard 3, there's a self-assessment worksheet, also your inventory of your food facilities that are under your regulatory authority, your risk-based procedure for classifying the facilities that are in that inventory, whether that's a 2, 3, or 4 tiered system. You're generally going to need to have some sort of a written justification for why you have adopted that particular system and what facilities you've chosen to classify in those criteria. So also your actual inspection procedures, your reporting procedures, and this is essentially what you're using to actually document that, whether it's a specific form or computer software, and the time frames in which you're turning that documentation in for review by supervisory staff, and also providing copies to the folks that you're inspecting. Any follow-up activities in terms of enforcement procedures and compliance. Your recall procedures, if you are responding to a recall. The procedures that address consumer and industry complaints. and your procedures for your sampling activities and your sample reports and any other documents like chain of custody forms that may be associated with those activities. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the next standard addresses your inspection audits, and this relates to, going back and making sure that you're doing all of the things that you set up in standard 3 the way that you have stipulated that you are going to. So these are the 3 key elements, which are your field audits, your what we call desk audits or your report audits, and then the sample audits. So there are some specific criteria in terms of the number of reports that you're generating and how that translates into the proportion of items that are required to be audited. Also, for your field audits, if you are, and I'm sure that a lot of the folks who are interested in participating or currently participating in the standards are also participating in the federal inspection program. Those field audits that your staff may be doing, if you're in phase 2 or 3 of that audit program, can count towards these field audits. Now, the audits have to be conducted by a qualified trainer or auditor, and those terms are defined in the standard. Now, in terms of the number of audits that you are required to conduct under the standard, within the 12-month period, if you are doing less than 40 reports, then you would audit all of them. If you have between 40 and 800, then you're going to use 40 of those. And then if you have more than 800, then it would be 5% of the actual reports up to a maximum of 70 for that time period. And 7% of your inspections that you are auditing for your desk audits would need to be from field inspections that had audits. In terms of your sample collection, there are criteria that are essentially the same as for your inspection reports. The sample reports that are generated after you collect samples would need to be checked. Again, if you have less than 40, all of them. Between 40 and 800, 40. And if you have over 800, then it would be 5% up to a maximum of 70 within that 12-month period. So you're going to make a determination of conformance with your procedures using calculations that are provided within the appendices 4.2, 3, and 4. And then you're going to use that to determine how well you are in conformance. Yes, so the information on the required audits is if your inspections or samples are less than 40, or excuse me, less than 40, then you would do all. If they are between 40 and 100, then you would do 40. And if they are more than 800, I'm sorry, did I say 100? I meant 800. If you're more than 800, then it's 5% up to a maximum of 70 audits. Okay, so Right, so you're going to use the 4.2, 4.3, and 4.4 appendices to calculate your conformance with your written procedures. And if you have issues that need to be addressed, then you would develop a corrective action plan. And those procedures would also be written. And those items are to address the scenarios that you see here on the slide. Either where you have an individual whose performance did not meet expectations, there was a performance factor where the program did not meet expectations, or you have an overall performance rating that falls below the standard. So you have procedures that address each of those three scenarios. The documents that are required for implementation of Standard 4 are, of course, the 4.1 self-assessment worksheet, your written procedures that document these elements of this program, and the summary of your inspection, your field audit findings, your desk audit findings, your sample audit findings, your actual form. Again, if you are participating in the federal inspection program, you could certainly use the FDA 3610 form. That is the standard reporting form for audits within the FMD 76 for that contract. But you could also develop your own state form that documents essentially the same information and utilize that instead. And then, of course, your audit forms for your sample audits, as well as your desk audits. And then finally, the corrective action plan that I described that addresses how you deal with deficiencies in the overall implementation of your inspection program. And that covers everything regarding Standard 4. The next presenter is going to be Mr. Rick Beckstrand with the Utah Department of Agriculture.
Thanks, Brian. So I enjoy talking about the standards in general. Standards have been so helpful to us here in Utah to up our game. I'll be talking about Standard 5 and 6. And so let's just kind of jump right in to Standard 5. So there are a number of ways that you can meet the requirements of this standard, and some of it is actually dependent on your state structure as to what roles and responsibilities will be fulfilled. This is kind of a little bit like Standard 10, where you don't have total control over all of the requirements because most of us in our states are working with a state health department or other agencies in a coordinated effort. And that's, really the basis of Standard 5 is that relationship building is really important, because if you don't have good relationships with your other agencies, it gets more difficult to respond successfully to an outbreak or a food-related incident. So that's really important. I think the way most states are structured is with the state health department doing the disease surveillance. They have the epidemiology teams there that do that disease surveillance and monitoring, and that initial report out to the other agencies that we could possibly be looking at an outbreak. We get that early notification from our health department because even though they may not have identified a suspect food at that point, we still like to know, if there's something out there on the horizon that we need to know about. So I think most of the time we're working with the state health department, and the state's Department of Agriculture generally is where environmental health is located. But I know of states where environmental health and epidemiology are both located in the state health department. So it just really depends on your state structure and how you're organized. But that relationship building part of it is really important. The first thing I think is to do a really good self-assessment. Use that self-assessment worksheet, I believe it's 5.1, to take a really good, honest look at where you're at And this will identify areas where you need to do some more work. If you've got some deficiencies in some of those requirements that are listed on the self-assessment. So that's very important. You could do a food emergency response plan to take care of your written procedure requirements, or you could have, like Utah has, we have separate written procedure documents. We've got trace back and trace forward procedures. The main meat of our program is that food emergency response procedures. Intentional contamination or food defense is another procedure that we use. Updating emergency contacts is another, and release of information to the public is another separate procedure document. And also we have an MOA with our state health department. If someone else other than your agency is going to do that disease surveillance, then you need to have that MOA in place. We just got ours updated this last summer. So that's an important document. And that should list out all of the roles and responsibilities that each agency is going to meet. So we have MOAs with not only our state health department, but with the local health departments, so that we know how they will participate if they're affected by that outbreak or that emergency situation, or whether it's been a natural disaster that's knocked down some of your food firms. All of those things come into play. So the main thing is that in your written procedures, you've got all of those elements that are listed in the standard are incorporated into not only your memorandum of agreement, but also your individual written policies or your food emergency response plan. And those can be, who is going to lead and coordinate the outbreak investigation. Where does that responsibility lie? Who's going to write the final report, the after action reporting? All of those things need to be included in those written procedures. And one thing that I do like to suggest is that if you don't have a copy of this document, you might want to ask your standards implementation person to give you a copy of this, the standards coordinator manual. I really wish that we had had this available when we were developing our programs, because it's a really good guide to help you through the requirements and the things that you need to do and just how to plan. I can't help but giving a shout out to the rapid response programs. So the rapid response team in a state really does help. We've got a rapid response team here in Utah that's active now, and it's pretty much taken over Standard 5. The other advantage to the rapid response team is that relationship building really intensifies when you've got a rapid response team. They can take, the duties and responsibilities of Standard 5 on them. And then not only that, but they practice response scenarios prior to them happening in real life. And that practice, really helps identify how you're going to respond, who's going to respond, what those roles and responsibilities look like during an outbreak situation. And those are all practiced. And, a lot of times you've made assignments prior to any actual incident that happens in your state. You've got those assignments made, and people know in advance what they'll be doing and what their responsibility is. So it does really smooth out that initial response to an outbreak instead of trying to determine who's going to do what. That's all pre-planned. So can't say enough about rapid response teams and how they help with emergency response. And I really do call this the emergency response standard, because it takes in a lot, not just foodborne illness outbreaks, but other food-related incidents and other hazard responses, including natural disasters that may have affected your state, so, or your food firms. So, and then there's the record-keeping requirements that are listed in the standards, so I won't belabor that. That's pretty much all I have on standard 5. Going to standard 6. So this is a standard that we really had a lot of work to do in the state of Utah. We did not have any written procedures for compliance and enforcement back in 2012 when we started on the standards. And not to belabor that, but just suffice to say, we had a lot of work to do. And in a way, it was kind of a good thing because we had to start from scratch and put this program together. And so there were many brainstorming sessions on what we wanted a compliance enforcement program to look like in Utah. And, you know, I really believe that we've came up with something that's a little bit unique. The way we structured the compliance and enforcement program is, we wrote one document. The program is all housed in that one program document. And we did some things that really help us, you know, as a smaller state without a lot of resources that some of the bigger states have. You know, we don't have enough people to put in every position that we would need to do this monitoring. So we built some technology solutions into this that really do help us make things more automatic, rather than us having to spend a lot of time, you know, running through reports or actual physical monitoring of, you know, as I'll go into some of these things that need to be monitored. I'll talk about how we do our progressive enforcement in Utah. And, you know, so it does need to be a progressive enforcement strategy, and that needs to take into account things like monitoring for critical violations, chronic violations, and chronic violators. And so, you know, I think this is one of the requirements of the standard that has been a sticking point for a lot of states. It's hard for us a lot of times to figure out how to monitor and capture this information. Critical violations, we all know what those are. Those are pretty easy to monitor. They happen less often, but chronic violations and chronic violators, a lot of states have had a tough time figuring that one out. And I'll tell you, the first thing you need to be successful with this element of this standard is to have a really good working definition of what is a chronic violation. I have not seen a standardized definition come from FDA on this, and I could be wrong. It might be out there somewhere, but you know, you need to have, and this definition of what you consider chronic needs to be your definition of what you believe is chronic, of chronic violation or a chronic violator in your state. We've come up with our own definition, and we've been real careful in our definition section in our program to define what is a repeat violation, which we believe is just two violations in a row. Chronic, we have it listed differently, and I won't give you that full definition, but it's a problem that's existed at the firm that's they've struggled with over a period of time. And then that could be, you know, they had that violation once and then they fixed it, and then you came back on a third time and it's out again, or it's out multiple times in their inspection history. So we consider that chronic, and we have a way to capture that information. We have a report that captures that and allows us to pull that report and see exactly who needs help, who's got a chronic situation that they need more education or more oversight on. With things like follow-up inspections, this is an area where we used to really struggle with making sure that our inspectors were out in a timely basis doing their follow-up inspections. So we've got automatic solution to that requires that because we score our inspections and based on that inspection score that makes the inspection have a grade, A, B, C, or D. And then based on that score, if it's a C or D inspection, it's automatically, we know they need to have a follow-up inspection. And I can pull up that grades report in the morning that's color-coded by the different grades. And it allows me to see instantly a picture of, you know, what inspections, were there problems and deficiencies and opportunities that firm has, and be able to assign that work out. You know, like I said, the follow-ups are automatic, but you know, with chronic violators, yes, there's follow-up inspections, and there's, you know, that progressive enforcement that we would use for that. But with having those mechanisms put in place, it's really helped us to develop a compliance and enforcement program that is successful. We haven't missed or been late for a follow-up in over 2 years. And so that's a big improvement for us on our end. So this is compliance and enforcement is a critical piece of your state program. And, you know, we've got what we feel is a really good compliance and enforcement program. I believe it's available. I believe we have shared that in the MFRPA portal on the AFTO website. You're welcome to go there and pull that program off if you would like to see it. You can also just email me and request that I send it to you if you're interested in looking at what we've done here in Utah. But every state's different. Your state laws are different, and you know, I'm sure we're doing something that may not work for every state, but it does work here in Utah. So that's really all I have on Standard 6, and I'm going to be passing off now to let's see, to Philip Fruiting. Take it away, Philip.
Thanks, Rick. Okay, I'm going to cover standards 7 and 8. Standard 7 is your industry and community relations. So the goal of standard 7 is for the state program to use outreach activities or outreach activity events to inform varied populations about food protection related issues. So your key elements are going to include your written procedures that contain information on how the program will communicate with food industry stakeholders and consumers. This could include your methods of communication, your interactions, if you're going to sponsor board, board meeting or a task force, advisory boards, those types of things. You're tailoring your outreach efforts to specific targeted populations. Are you doing some kind of an outreach specifically based for the consumers about a product or the industry about how your program is operating? And then you also want to document and evaluate your outreach activity events using Appendix 7.2 or your equivalent form. Robin mentioned that Standard 2 takes a lot of paperwork. Well, Standard 7, if you're maintaining the documentation and things like that, your agendas, your meeting minutes, and those other documentations, it takes a lot of paperwork to maintain that documentation too. And your required documentation for this standard would be your written procedures, your Appendix 7.1, which is your self-assessment, Appendix 7.2, which is your evaluation for that outreach event, and then your meeting summaries, your agendas, and other records documenting interaction with food industry stakeholders and consumers. Next slide, please, Daphne. And Standard 8 has to deal with your program resources. Just make sure that you've got enough resources to do these things to operate your program. You want to complete your self-assessment, which is to calculate the number of staff required to complete your required inspection activity. based on your inventory and your risk assessment. And then you also want to make sure they've got the required inspection and sampling collection equipment, that you've got a record of that and maintaining that. Your documentation of those standards, you've got Appendix 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3. With that, I know it's fairly quick, but these are a couple of, they're not necessarily minor standards, but they're pretty easy to maintain and maintain conformance to. So I'm going to pass this over to Sherry of Pennsylvania.
Okay, thanks, Philip. I'm going to talk a little bit about Standard 9, which is probably a longer standard, and then I'll touch on Standard 10. The Standard 9 is basically, I like to call it kind of an overarching standard in the realm of things. It's basically a standard designed to have your program continue to periodically assess your conformance with the standard, and it also drives you to develop a strategic improvement plan, all in the spirit of making sure that your program is on a path of continuous improvement. So there are a couple key elements in this standard. The obvious one is that the first year that you enroll in the standards, and I believe we've pretty much all done this, is you do your baseline self-assessment to see where you are. So that when you enroll, that's required to be done in year 1. But then part of this standard also requires that you annually do a reassessment of your program against each of the other standards. So you're required to do that on an annual basis. The self-assessment does have worksheets, and there are instructions that are in the appendixes. There is a summary appendix 9.1 that you have to complete. That's just kind of a summary. But every standard does have an appendix worksheet and some instructions that will guide you through how to do the self-assessment on each of the individual standards. Part of Standard 9 also requires that you develop a written document control procedure. So this involves basically making sure that all your documents are current and fit for use throughout your program. So sometimes that's easier if you're a smaller state. In Pennsylvania, we have 100 inspectors and another probably 15 management employees that all use our various operating procedures, applications, documents, forms. So it can be a challenge to make sure that everyone is using the most current version. There are different ways to do that. In Pennsylvania, we use SharePoint so that we're all accessing a document controlled library where the most current documents are, and everyone has access to that. But there are other mechanisms out there to make sure that happens. But that's the key, is all your documents, whether it's in your field, with your management staff, in your central offices, you have to make sure everyone's using the same forms. The other piece of that is your record retention. So the standards do require a 3-year minimum record retention, but most states have longer record retention periods. So if your state's record retention period is longer, you need to follow your state record retention procedure and document that in your SOPs, what that protocol is. Another big key piece of Standard 9 is your strategic improvement plan. This standard requires that you have a strategic improvement plan documented and developed. The standard does lay out what needs to be in that standard strategic improvement plan. Anytime that you do a self-assessment or there's an audit of your program and something doesn't meet a standard, you need to document that in a strategic improvement plan. So those elements would include what it is that you're not meeting in a standard, your improvement that's needed to meet the standard. You need to document a completion date, a projected completion date, a person that's going to be assigned to oversee the corrective action that you're going to take, and then the date that the task was completed. I know in Pennsylvania, we've been enrolled in the standards for quite a few years. This is actually a good document to keep even for your own purposes and for management. Like we can see over the last 10 years by looking through our strategic improvement plan, all the things that we've accomplished over the years to meet the standards and improve our program. So it's even good. It's even a good historical document, but it is the key to continuous improvement. I think the only thing I would counsel when it comes to a strategic improvement plan, especially in the early stages, if you have big chunks of a standard that you perhaps don't meet or big projects, it is easier to tackle them if you break those projects down into smaller tasks with smaller, shorter timeframes for completion. So I just think we found that easier than trying to write a big task with a completion date that might take you 2 years out to get it done. Break it down into smaller chunks. It's more manageable. And then the last thing in this standard, that it does require that you participate in the FDA assessments or audits that they do. Tressa with FDA will talk a little bit more about the audit, but this standard does require that you participate and that you address any findings that the audit staff might have by incorporating them into your strategic improvement plans. So with that, there's a lot of detail in this standard. It sounds like it's a simple standard, but it's not really. You really have to pay attention to the dotted I's and the crossed T's. It involves a lot. And again, I'll go back to that strategic improvement plan. That really is key to making sure you have a vibrant program that's on a continuous improvement path. If you're static, you're going to fall behind. We all know things change. Federal regulations change. There are new ones. Your state mandates change. And you have to grow with all those changes that are going to come your way. Next slide. Standard 10. This is your laboratory support standard. I will say in Pennsylvania, this was the hardest standard we had to meet. We met our first 9 standards years before we met standard 10. So we were compliant for probably, 4, 5, 6 years with 9 of the 10 standards. This standard basically requires that the programs have access to a laboratory that's capable of doing food, environmental, and clinical samples if that's appropriate. Some of us are Department of Agriculture's, and you might have a Department of Health that does clinical samples. So that piece is where it's appropriate for your program. The program does have to maintain a list of laboratory analysis that can be conducted, routine and non-routine. If you don't have a laboratory within your own agency program, then you have to have a contract or a written agreement with a primary servicing lab. Again, that's going to vary based on what state you're in. I know in Pennsylvania, our laboratory is part of our department. It's part of our bureau. So that didn't apply to us. But the big key piece is your program has to have a laboratory that has a current ISO IEC 17025 accreditation, either to the 2005 or the 2017 standards, to analyze food and environmental samples. That is a key piece. If you don't have an accredited laboratory, they have to have a quality system in place that's going to meet those same ISO standards. And there is in the manufactured food program standards, there is a list of those things that has to encompass. I don't know of too many labs that have gone down that path. I mean, if you're going to go down that path to develop that type of quality system, you might as well get accredited. But that is a lengthy process if your lab is not accredited. It took our lab probably 3 or 4 years of intense work to actually become accredited. It's almost, I equated it almost to like starting from scratch with MFRPS. you might have been doing a lot of things correctly, but you didn't have documented SOPs and a documented trail of things, or, you know, auditing or a written training plan and all your training records in place. Well, with ISO accreditation, the lab has to do that as well. So if you don't have a laboratory that has that in place, it's not going to come quickly. There also are some other challenges. Every state's different. So sometimes your challenges are going to be different. You might not have a laboratory within your own agency, and you're dealing with another state agency that might not have a mandate to pursue accreditation. Some states might have to use commercial laboratories. You know, you're going to face different challenges with this standard based on how your laboratory system interrelates with your regulatory program. So with that, I will turn it over to Tressa to talk a little bit more about grants and the DSI staff, et cetera.
Thank you, Sherry. So, okay, we got our slide up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the flexible funding model, and the one I'm currently showing here, what we're going to show is what we're in now. We're actually in the 4th year. This flexible funding model started in 2018, and it will finish up next year in 2023. So it's crazy that we're 5 years into this. And listen to the folks that have spoke. They've been through all the growing pains, the 11 plus years of how we funded, trying to meet the standards, staying in conformance with the standards. And the positive part of all of this is that out of the 43 programs that are enrolled in the standards, we now have 36 states that are what we call 10 for 10 that are in full conformance. So that is great information and great information to share with others as we process through this. But in the beginning, the funding was you had to apply for manufacturing funding, then you had to apply for RT funding, you had to apply for task force and special projects. So here you've got a grant person having to write 4 different grants, and then you had to keep track of them separately, and they all had different dates and so forth. So with that, next slide, is we came up with what we call the flexible funding model. And I can tell you right now, the next funding cycle, the application for that will be sometime in the next year, FY23 may go into that, but we're starting those discussions about that, of how the funding is going to be. But in the beginning, everybody was getting the same amount of money. So you had a 3-man program versus a 30-man program, and you couldn't spend all that money for trying to, labor for 3 people versus labor for 30. So there was a lot of work, a lot of thought, a lot of process through our groups to come up with what we call the flexible funding model. So what you're looking at is the current model. Chances are it's going to be somewhere in the same type of format. And then what I'm hearing is all these people that are in the full conformance, I always tell my states, start capturing some of these special projects, these ideas, because these are enhancements, these are improvement, this is maintenance to your program, and this just gives you the opportunity of items to apply for on the next cycle when the funding model comes up. So as Sherry mentioned in Standard 9, those are great places to keep those notes and use that as you apply for the next cycle when that comes up. So in the beginning, just those few states that I mentioned are still in what we call this maintenance, or excuse me, the building piece, the base funding. And then those other states are going into this maintenance. And as you see, there's 3 levels, level 1, 2, and 3. And once again, that's the size of the program, because a 3-man show doesn't need 300,000 versus a 30-man show needs more than 150,000. And then also with that is the task force. In the beginning, it was a line item, and it was totally different on how that was processed. So these are opportunities for you to develop task force and receive funding, and we have support with those groups. The special projects, we've offered that once in this cycle. Depends on if we get any extra funding. If you say, hey, I want to teach a class, I want to make a video. I mean, there's multiple options of ideas that you can come up with to use that. And then the RRT is, that's been mentioned a couple of times, the building of that and the support for standard 5 with that. So keep those in mind as you work yourself through that. And then with that, let's go to the next slide. And this part is the Office of Partnerships. What we do as our positions, DSI is what we call ourselves now. We support the manufacturing food programs. We have staff that deals with animal feed. We just have recently come out, you should have all got notices. We now have an egg set of standards, and we're also now starting produce. Those work groups are building, and you'll see that coming up in the future of having involvement with state programs that have large produce programs for involvement of writing those standards. And our position are what we call technical survivors or advisors, survivors. I always laugh, always tell state programs, I'm with the government, I'm here to help. And that's what our position is we try to educate you on info that's coming out from the feds, federal FDA, other programs or whatever's happening. If we've got changes to the standards coming up or that's going to affect your program, pretty much the states we're assigned to pretty much know how your programs work. When FDA comes with some ideas on different ideas, we have to reiterate often that we got 50 programs doing it 50 different ways. So that's always a reminder of that. We support the Alliance, and this is part of this group here. It's all your states enrolled with the standards. The DSI also supports on the feed control piece with the AFCO. We often, with the support with us, we review your reports that you submit to DBIA and through OAGs to make sure. A lot of times you may say change rulemaking, and the question is, well, what did it take for rulemaking? And after talking to your DSI person, you're like, oh, well, they had to have public meetings, and they had to go to legislation, and then they had to have a board of health, and then they had to go public announcement. So we can help support you on some of your deliverables, and we review those to make sure that you stay in line with that. And then with the coalition, with the task force, we have staff that can support you with that within Office of Partnerships, and we have group calls and can do whatever we can to enhance those type programs with that. But as you keep hearing the buzzwords now, mutual alliance and integrated food safety system initiatives, and that will continue to be the buzzwords as we progress in the next few years. And you're seeing that with the exchange of inspections, the exchange program, and some of the other programs that are AFDO are supporting. So with that, next slide. And this is the audit staff slide. With that, it kind of goes through what the process is on how they actually set up the audit piece with that. They normally have a call with you. They have a pre-assessment call and tell you what's going to be expected from you. They tell you you're going to need to submit all the 0.5 pieces and all the 10 standards and the documentation with that. And with that, they ask you to submit those individually in separate emails, because a lot of those could be huge documents, loads that if they have to be zipped, or smaller ones. But a lot of times with it breaking each one up into an email, since we're at this virtual stage right now, is that they can divide the up on their team, and they conquer the process going through that, instead of trying to say, oh, did you look at page 3 or page 5? It's, did you look at standard 3 or did you look at standard 5? So then they come in and they've got scheduled dates. At this point, they are scheduling this next year is set for the FY22 year. They have started those assessments, and they work through that schedule. You're at 18, 36, and 60 months. Like I said, most states are sitting at the 60 months. So you're assessed every 2 years, looking at maintenance, making sure you're complying with what you've got on paper. So they just validate your process right there. So there's opportunities for correction. They have a closeout with you. They have on the virtual piece, they give you time that evening, the next day, a week, whatever the agreement is. I mean, they don't close you into a box. So with that, all that is, worked out through the audit staff for them to help you with that. They issue a draft report. With that, there's opportunities for the corrections to be made. They give you a time span. We've got several states that it took them 30 days to fix something. It took them 3 weeks to fix something. And at that point, before they issue the final report and y'all have made an agreement, they'll get you in full conformance or look for the correction. But the intent is just an oversight to make sure what you're doing on papers, what you're doing. There's no gotcha. It's a positive opportunity. It's just a check and balance. With the kind of funding that goes through the federal system into the states, just like a CPA come in and audit or an IRS auditing your tax return, there's just a validation with that. So with that, that's all the slides I have, and I'm going to send it back to Pat. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tressa. So we're going to go ahead and just cover a few kind of highlights of the Alliance itself, just to give you a little bit more familiarity with what the Alliance does. The real purpose of the Alliance is to serve as a structure for state and territorial manufactured food programs to provide recommendations to FDA and the Partnership for Food Protection for improving and maintaining the standards, and also for manufactured food regulatory programs in general and helping them enhance their programs with that continuous improvement kind of mentality. The Alliance serves as a forum for communication, collaboration, and training that assists state programs in meeting or conforming with the standards. The Alliance was formed under the Alliance for Advancing a Nationally Integrated Food Safety System. That's a cooperative agreement that was issued by FDA to AFTO. The Alliance and FDA work together to establish a network of state manufactured food programs, conduct surveys. You'll see surveys come out periodically on a variety of issues. We would ask you to help us out and take the time to respond to those. We're usually compiling that information for a variety of different reasons in support of other states and legislation they may be doing, in terms of planning for training needs, and in terms of informing policy decisions that FDA is making in directions that they may be going. So in the long term, it always benefits us to respond to those surveys. We identify and track state laws and regulations. We provide a lot of task-oriented guidelines, and we collect and are a repository for best practices, state procedures that are shared, that are accessible to you to be able to access and gain that information so you can utilize it as you revamp your procedures. And also training and outreach. We also maintain several directories, not the least of which is our directory of state and local officials, which you can access on the AFTO website. So if you need to connect with somebody in a neighboring program, we have all the key contacts in there. We have all the MFRPS coordinators listed. So if you need a MFRPS coordinator in another state and you want to reach out to them, contacts are there, program managers are there. So it's a great resource to be able to grab an email or a phone number of that person. You also have the ability to download a V card now from that on individual contacts so that you can bring them right into your contact list without having to retype everything, which, hey, I like that. No retyping. Gotta love it. All right, let's go on to the next slide, Daphne. All right, so let's talk a little bit about our board members. Here are our current board members for the Alliance. The board consists of 6 regional representatives. These loosely follow the AFTO geographic regions. We have 1 member at large that represents, of course, all of the enrolled states. Board members are elected to a 3-year term, and this is done by their regional voting members. So, the NEFDOA representatives vote on the NEFDOA representative and so forth. The member at large position, of course, is voted on by all of the voters across the country. Each year, the board selects a chair and a vice chair. The chair is responsible for presiding over meetings of the board of the Alliance. They work with AFTO to support the Alliance in the initiatives that we work on under that project. We recommend establishment of Alliance committees and the members of those committees, and they develop the agendas for the board meetings. The vice chair performs the duties of the chair when they're not available, kind of obvious there. And they assist with the assignment of standard change proposals to the work groups when we are doing our standards change process, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. They do other duties as assigned by the chair, and they typically then become the chair. The chair serves a 1-year term. The vice chair usually promotes to become the chair, and then serves as a chair for a year, then before they step back into just being a regular old board member. The board also has a variety of technical advisors. Daphne, you want to go to the next slide? There we go. So our technical advisors, they bring a variety of expertise on specific topics. They help inform board decisions and provide a lot of good technical input to the board. So we have 2 advisors from FDA's Office of Partnerships, Divisions of Standards Implementation. That's currently Guy and Michelle. We have 2 advisors from the OHAFO, the Office of Human and Animal Food Operations audit staff, and that's currently Ellen and Dawn. We have 2 advisors from AFTO that are versed in manufactured foods. It's myself and Steve Stitch, both formerly state food program managers over manufactured food programs in our prior lives. We have an advisor from the state laboratory, so they can advise the board on issues related to Standard 10 and laboratory. And in the last couple of years, actually just 2 years ago now, we're hitting our 2-year anniversary, we added an advisor that was a state MFRPS coordinator. That person is elected every 2 years by the MFRPS coordinators across the country, and they'll serve a 2-year term on the board as a technical advisor, bringing in, again, kind of that boots on the ground implementation insight to the board. Next slide, Daphne. So there's 3 types of members to the board. You'll hear this and we'll talk about it, and I just really want to stress the voting member piece of this. So in order to be a member of the Alliance, you have to meet one of these 3 criteria. The voting member has to be a manager or their management level delegate that has responsibility or overall responsibility for a state or territorial program that's enrolled in the standards. Voting members can serve as an elected official or board officer. They participate in all Alliance activities, but the key point here, of course, going along with their title, is they are the one that's responsible or has the authority to vote for the program. Each program that's enrolled in the standards has 1 vote on any of the issues that we bring before the Alliance. This becomes really important when we do the change proposals, and we often do those associated with the meetings. Every once in a while, a manager will want to delegate it, but they can only delegate it to another manager. They cannot delegate it to a coordinator. So something just to keep in mind there. It has to be a program manager that is that voting member. Non-voting members are any other employee of that state or territorial program that's enrolled in the standards, and again, you're going to be able to participate in all Alliance activities. The only difference is you're not voting. So you're still participating in the work groups, you're still providing recommendations, providing input, doing all the other things that go on, participating in meetings. You just don't have the voting. It's the voting member or the program manager that has that. And then we have our technical advisors. We just talked about that on the previous slide. Typically FDA, state, territory, or AFTO. They help the programs achieve or implement the standards. Technical advisors do participate on the board in those limited capacities we talked about. They're always non-voting members, so all they can do is just provide that technical input, and then it's ultimately up to the board and the voting members to make the decisions that will be carried forward to FDA. Next slide. So how does the Alliance help states? So those of you that are new, that haven't been around for very long, you're going to find there's a variety of different things that the Alliance does. We really provide a significant amount of support and opportunity for engagement, and these are predominantly surrounding issues that impact the standards or just manufactured food regulation in general. The Alliance and FDA, as you know, host an annual meeting. We have our next annual meeting coming up February 8th through 10th. Normally, these meetings are scattered around the country. We kind of bounce around from year to year, so we're not in the same area. But with COVID, 2021 and 2022 are both virtual meetings. Normally they are in person, but these are going to be virtual as a result of COVID. Hopefully we'll be able to get back to an in-person in 2023. AFTO hosts the MFRPA portal. You will find access to that on the AFTO website, www.afto.org. And if you go up into the header, you select the portals and then select the MFRPA portal. That will bring you right into that landing page, and then you can save that in your favorites so you can go directly to it next time. You do need a login. If you don't have one, don't worry about it. All you got to do is ask. We'll get you signed up. As long as you work for a state or territorial manufactured food program or for FDA, you have access to the portal. It's got incredible amount of resources. I mean, if you look at everything that's on there, there's well over 1,000 documents and resource materials that are there. So it's a great place to go. There's a lot of best practices. We have all the old board minutes. There's access to current and older versions of the standards and their appendices. There's a resource binder for you to access key information. We have all of our change process information going back several cycles, so you can go back and look at previous proposals and look at what the discussion was amongst the work group and what the voting was on that. So again, a lot of great information there. That also, you can access the index of shared documents there, which is that repository of state procedures and best practices that's collected and organized in large part by standard. So if you're going to be working on your inspection procedures under standard 3, you can go to that standard 3 folder in the index of shared documents and access a couple of dozen other states' procedures in that area. And you can look and see how they're handling that. So you can utilize that to tune up your procedures, maybe get some great ideas. I used to love it as a manager because I'd go in and I'd find some great ideas that other people had implemented, and I'd rip them off and use them in my program because they were great. They were good ideas and people thinking outside the box and finding better ways to do things. So I'm all about the way to do it. And if you can get some of that information there, absolutely access it. The Alliance manages the change proposal process, as I mentioned. The board will periodically open that up, usually every 2 years or so. It gets opened up. Anybody that's enrolled in the standards can submit change proposals and recommendations. We have work groups that are made up of you, both voting and non-voting members and technical advisors, that come together and review each of the proposals and discuss them, discuss the impacts of them. In some cases, they may do a little bit of language tweaking to make sure that they flow properly and properly reference other existing language in the standards. And then they make a recommendation on them that goes back before the board. The board looks at it, makes sure that they address the issue that was submitted by the submitter. And as long as it was, then it goes to a public presentation that we usually do either just before or at the annual meeting. So we'll actually present the recommended changes to the standards that the work groups came up with, discuss them, open it up to take input and feedback from all the membership, both non-voting and voting members. And then we'll look at it. And if some additional modifications need to be made based on those comments we received, then that will be done in the work groups. And then as those proposals go before the voting members, if they get passed, then they get submitted to FDA with a recommendation that these standards actually be updated and modified during the next go round. The standards are updated officially every 3 years. So we're on every 3-year cycle. The last most current version is the 2019 version. So we are expecting the newest version with all of the change proposals that were submitted over the last couple of years will be published in the fall of 2022. You're going to hear a lot more about that at the upcoming meeting in a couple of weeks. So I don't want to let all the cats out of the bag, but we'll go over that and you'll have a lot more details about some of those changes that you'll be seeing later this year. And last but certainly not least, we serve as that forum to assist you in coming into conformance with the standards. Sometimes that's just an interpretation issue, or maybe there's an implementation issue you might be having, or maybe you had an issue finding on your audit and you need some help kind of understanding what's going on or how to address it. Feel free to reach out to your regional board representative, or you can reach out to us here at AFTO. You can reach out to myself, and I'm happy to get it to the right person or address that with you and help you. Your DSI representative is also another great resource if you have those questions. But again, we view this very much as a support team. We're here to help each other be successful. It's in all of our best interest that we are all successful and all have top-notch programs to ensure that we are all working at a very high functioning level. This is really about working at a high level and having a continuous improvement program. Nobody expects our programs to be perfect. We all know there's going to be something that falls through the cracks once in a while. There's going to be an issue that didn't get updated that needs to be addressed. This really provides a process for you to go through and periodically identify those and then make sure you get it on the radar by getting it on that continuous improvement plan so that you can track it, make sure it gets addressed and gets improved and address that issue. So going forward, it's taken care of. Next slide, Daphne. All right, and so for key resources for our new coordinators, wanted to highlight just a couple of them, which again are on the MFRPS portal. The coordinators manual. This was just recently developed within the last couple of years by coordinators, and it's intended for new coordinators. It really breaks down each of the standards and highlights some of those key responsibilities under each of those program standards that you're going to be responsible for having to deal with. It provides a wealth of recommendations for coordinators based on years of experience of those coordinators. Coordinators wrote this. So, you're getting their firsthand knowledge of everything that they came across while they were learning the standards. So it's really a great resource for new coordinators. We also have that resource binder, and I mentioned that on the last slide. Don't be fooled by the name. It's all electronic at this point. So it's all there on the portal. You can access it, but it's just a quick reference point or an index for you to grab old copies of the standards, or maybe grab access to the animal feed standards or retail program standards. Other key documents and procedures are there. So again, you can take a look at that. We go through and update that once a year to make sure that it's all current. You can also download those copies of the actual standards and their appendices right there from that website. So you don't have to go digging around on the FDA site trying to find them if you don't already have them bookmarked. And next slide. And I did also want to point out for our coordinators, we do have a mentorship program that we kicked off last year. What it does is it pairs new coordinators that are interested with existing experienced coordinators. That way you have someone that you can bounce ideas off of. They help you fill in those knowledge gaps that you might have. And they're really a great resource for you just to ask a question once in a while, or shoot them an email and say, hey, what about this? Or, hey, this was coming up. How do I handle this? It's really been, I think, pretty beneficial for our new coordinators. We had about 10 or so that participated in it this last year. We just recently did a survey and got really good positive feedback from the coordinators that they all found it beneficial. Some are a little bit more formal than others and meeting on a regular basis. Others are more informal. So it's really just between you and your mentor, how you want to set that up. If you have funds in your budget, you can certainly go visit them for a couple of days. If you get out of this little COVID mess and you can travel a little bit, feel free to do that. You can certainly go and meet with them and sit with them for a couple of days to get more information about how you might apply things in your program. So with that, that's kind of rounding out our big overview of the standards. Daphne, you can go to our next slide. So we're going to go ahead and cover a few questions here. We got a little bit of time left. I'm going to first take our questions from chat. I'm going to scroll back up a little bit here. So Suzanne had asked about the termination numbers for audits, and I believe that that got repeated again. Rashley did chime in for her, and thanks, Rashley. There are tables in Standard 4 that lay it out really easily for you to identify how many different, either inspection reports or sample reports that you need to pull, laboratory reports, to be able to evaluate those. So, doing those audits, whether they're field inspection audits or your inspection reports or your sample reports, again, the criteria for how many you need to do are all listed there. And it's based on usually the amount of work that you conduct during the year. Virginia asked Rick if he could further talk a little bit about how RRTs and the MFRPS documents differ or overlap in terms of these required documents that would come up in a MFRPS audit. They have a rapidly growing RRT and need to decide what's an RRT procedure and where it's fruitful to use one document that lives in MFRPS. So, Rick, I don't know if you want to chime in on that, or anyone else wants to chime in. I can certainly give you some experience as well from my time with Calvert. Well, throw it back to Rick since it was targeted.
Yeah. I'd just basically say that, we've used the MFRPS documents for the first couple of years with our rapid response team. They've developed an operations manual now where they've got it in a manual format. They did, take the meat out of the standards that written documents that we had for MFRPS and move that over into their operations manual with all of those different requirements. So that's kind of how we did it in our state.
Right, and I can tell you in California, when I was running the program there, we had our California Food Emergency Response Team was up and operational before we actually enrolled in the standards. So we already had many of these procedures already in place. And so what we actually did is we maintained our CalFIRT procedures and our emergency response procedures, and just went back to them, cross-checking them against the standards to make sure that we addressed everything that was required under standard 5. We kind of checked that box. You also may want to have just that little cross index. It's going to be a one-sheeter, that you put your, all those elements that are listed in the individual standards and where you're going to find them. So if I'm looking at, standard 5 and I'm looking for emergency contact lists, hey, I'm going to find that in my CalFIRT manual page number, 192. But if you cross-reference and create a little cross-reference list when you are being audited, or when it's time for you to do your periodic self-assessment, you know right where you need to go to be able to find that information. It's right there at your fingertips. So you've got a nice little cross-reference cheat sheet to take you right to that information. But if you index them across, you'll make sure that you just cover them. But you can absolutely cover them in those RRT procedures, and just reference them. You just need to have written procedures there in the program. They don't have to be in a document titled Standard 5 or anything. All right, Rick, they're interested in what data system your program's utilizing. Is it a custom or is it an off-the-shelf product?
So it's an in-house system, food safety management system, FSMS. We developed it here in-house. It's been kind of a blessing and a curse because it's developed based on how we built our programs and has a lot of great features. But as we continue to add on, it's gotten a little bit buggy because we're asking it to do so much now. So we're doing a little more debugging than we used to have to do, but it's a custom system.
Great. And then we had a question for Tressa on submitting documentation for the pre-audit review. Tressa did address that in chat, but I'll just throw it out in case anyone get their chat. But they were asking, is Food Shield is the document submission or the preferred way of submitting it, or is it email? When you've got a lot of documentation and information to submit for the audit, how is that going? And I think Tressa answered that audit staff depends on the auditor, right? I mean, not all of them are using Food Shield. In fact, most are not. They'll usually, I think, you ask you to submit them by email or some other format, but you can work with your auditor to do that, and certainly offer up a different solution if you find one that's going to be easier for you to utilize. Anything else on that, Tressa?
No, that has been some of the circumstances in the past, is that documents were too big, or the state couldn't get the information to go into the federal system block. So audit staff will work with the state program, but as I mentioned, Food Shield is not a normal avenue to transfer documents.
Right. And AFTO does have a secure doc file transfer feature that sends the file in an encrypted manner to an individual. So you select the email of the person so that they'll be notified, and then they'll go out to the secure government cloud server to retrieve it. There's no file size limitations on that. There's no cost for you to be able to use that. You can access it from the AFTO website. You can put as much security parameters on it as you want, or you can just allow them to download it. It can actually be set up as just a read only, so that they can only read it, they can't download it. Of course, you know who you're sending it to in this case, so it's not a big deal. So you just would leave that security parameter off, which is just a checkbox. But that way you can upload a 2 gigabyte file. The only thing it's limiting is the amount of time you have, because the larger the file, the longer it takes to upload. But it does go to a secure government cloud server. And then depending on, again, who you identify as being authorized to access it, they'll receive a link, and you can even password protect it if you wanted, if you felt your information was sensitive, so they can access it that way. So secure doc, again, you can access that from the afto.org site. If you're interested, you can always use that or suggest that to the auditors if you've got large files. Do we have any other questions? Feel free to go ahead and unmute your mic or raise your hand, and we'll recognize you. All right, not seeing any other questions or hands raised. Would any of the other speakers like to comment on anything, add any other information before we finish up the general session here and move on to the management session? All right. Well, I would like to thank all of our attendees for participating today. We hope you found this useful. It's intended again to provide you with an overview. If you're a new coordinator, we would definitely recommend you take a look at the mentorship program as an opportunity if you're still brand new to it, because I think there's some great opportunity there to learn from an existing coordinator. We're going to go ahead and move into the management session now. So